Today, the Book of Abraham is included in a volume of Mormon scripture called the Pearl of Great Price. It is considered inspired scripture by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, of equal authority to the Bible. The Book of Abraham includes a creation story, but it's dramatically different than the biblical creation story found in the book of Genesis. Where the Bible points to one true creator God, the Book of Abraham recounts a startling new twist.
And then the Lord said, "Let us go down." And they went down at the beginning, and they, that is the gods, organized and formed the heavens and the earth. Book of Abraham, chapter 4, verse 1. And the gods said among themselves, "On the seventh time we will end our work, which we have counseled, and we will rest on the seventh time from all our work which we have counseled." And the gods concluded upon the seventh time, because that on the seventh time they would rest from all their works, which they, the gods, counseled among themselves to form, and sanctified it. And thus were their decisions at the time that they counseled among themselves to form the heavens and the earth. Book of Abraham, chapter 5, verses 2 and 3.
Judaism and Christianity have always been monotheistic religions. There's one God. There's one Creator. And if he had a council, it was a council of created angelic beings that did his bidding by his sovereign authority. And the idea of equally co-eternal beings working with him on a group project is totally unprecedented in Jewish and Christian teaching.
Joseph Smith announced that he would publish additional installments of his Book of Abraham, but he never did. And in June of 1844, he was assassinated.
And a group of Mormon dissidents published a newspaper called the Nauvoo Expositor, which accused Joseph Smith as mayor of taking too much into his own hands. And there were some references in the Nauvoo Expositor to the notion of plural marriage. And so, as mayor, he sent the constabulary to destroy the newspaper. And the governor brought him into Carthage, Illinois, and put him in jail. And then the governor turned his back and took the militia and went to Nauvoo, leaving the jail unprotected. And then other militia with blackened faces came in and shot him.
On June 27, 1844, his cell was stormed. Joseph was shot, and as he fell from a second-floor window, he was fired upon numerous times. No one was ever convicted for his brutal murder. In 1846, under the leadership of Brigham Young, the Mormons made their historic trek from Nauvoo to the Great Salt Lake Valley. At the time, this was isolated frontier territory, far from the jurisdiction of the U.S. government. And though Joseph Smith was no longer leading the Mormons, his Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and Pearl of Great Price, including the Book of Abraham, all became canon, inspired scriptures on par with the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. They are the basis for the unique theology of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints to this day. In the Great Salt Lake Valley, the Mormons once again proved their ability to settle frontier territory and to build a thriving town. They began work on another temple, their greatest yet. But the scroll Joseph Smith had identified as a lost Book of Abraham remained in Illinois, in the possession of Joseph's mother, Lucy Mack Smith, and his widow, Emma. In 1856, 12 days after Lucy's death, Emma Smith, who now seemed to have ambivalent feelings about her late husband, sold the papyri to a man named Abel Combs. Emma, now remarried to a man named Louis C. Bideman, provided an affidavit attesting that the antiquities had belonged to Joseph.
This certifies that we have sold to Mr. A. Combs 4 Egyptian mummies with the records of them. They were purchased by the Mormon prophet Joseph Smith at the price of $2,400 in the year 1835. They were highly prized by Mr. Smith on account of the importance which attached to the record, which was accidentally found enclosed in the breast of one of the mummies. Emma Smith Bideman, May 26, 1856.
One of the things that is really interesting about Emma Smith, she was very much engaged in the process of forgetting as well as remembering, because she has to forget that he introduced plural marriage into Mormonism. Even though we know that she was at some of these ceremonies where he married other women that were friends of his, friends of hers, and her husband married them as well, she told her sons that it was Brigham Young that introduced plural marriage into Mormonism.
Two of the mummies sold to Abel Combs were later acquired by a Chicago museum that was destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. It was assumed that the Joseph Smith papyri had also been destroyed, lost forever to the emerging knowledge of Egyptology. From early on, non-Mormons were dubious of Joseph's claim to have recovered a book written by Abraham 2,000 years before Christ and lost for nearly 4,000 years. A man named William West, who visited the Mormons in Kirtland and viewed Joseph Smith's Egyptian scrolls, expressed his doubts in an 1837 pamphlet.
Is it possible that a record written by Abraham containing the most important revelations that God ever gave to man should be entirely lost by the tenacious Israelites and preserved by the unbelieving Egyptians, and by them embalmed and deposited in the catacombs with an Egyptian priest? I venture to say no. It is not possible. It is more likely that the records are Egyptian.
In 1859, a French Egyptologist named Théodule de Verrier provided the first scholarly evaluation of the Book of Abraham. The focus of de Verrier's critique was 3 illustrations, or facsimiles, that Joseph Smith copied from the Egyptian scrolls and published as part of his Book of Abraham. Below each of the facsimiles, Joseph provided his explanations of their meanings. According to Joseph, facsimile 1 depicts an idolatrous priest about to slay Abraham on an altar. The scene is specifically referred to in the text of the book itself.
And it came to pass that the priests laid violence upon me, that they might slay me also, as they did those virgins upon this altar. And that you may have a knowledge of this altar, I will refer you to the representation at the commencement of this record. Book of Abraham, chapter 1, verse 12.
But de Verrier noticed that there was something wrong with the pictures. They closely resembled scenes he had come across numerous times in common Egyptian burial documents. But Smith, according to de Verrier, had completely misidentified the characters and the scenes. In facsimile 1, Smith labeled the standing figure on the left as a priest, knife in hand, attempting to slay Abraham. In reality, said de Verrier, this is the Egyptian god Anubis, assisting the resurrection of a deceased Egyptian. Anubis was also drawn incorrectly. He should have been pictured with the head of a jackal, not the head of a man.
The god Anubis, who should have a jackal's head, effecting the resurrection of Osiris. Théodule de Verrier, 1859.
You would never imagine, as an Egyptologist, that the god, the black god on the left of this scene, had anything but a jackal's head. That's just normal.
Joseph Smith had explained another of the illustrations in the Book of Abraham, called facsimile 3, as Abraham, seated on Pharaoh's throne, lecturing the royal court on matters of astronomy. But again, de Verrier said Joseph's explanation was completely wrong. Facsimile 3 was also a rendition of a common scene from Egyptian burial documents, depicting a deceased man being led into the presence of Osiris, the Egyptian god of the underworld.